The other point that I want to make before finishing, we've got a few more minutes. Yeah,
absolutely.
We'll get out the session. Okay. It's really, well, first of all, about ambivalence. In the first instance, Orwell's own ambivalence about these things, and then about our ambivalence on the subject of torture. Hopefully bring things more up to date. I think Orwell's got a very double-sided attitude on these questions, actually. More double-sided than some readings of 1984, the most obvious surface reading of 1984, which suggests itself to one when you read it as a teenager or when you first read it, might suggest. It's interesting to put 1984 alongside his essay on Leo Tolstoy and the Fool. In that essay, Tolstoy basically thought that Shakespeare was crap. Not supposed to find this, but I don't think that's much of an oversimplification of his views. He picks out the special attention King Lear on the score, which he thinks is just rubbish. And yeah, he thinks that's the worst one, right? So Orwell says about this, well, it just shows, in a sense, the narrowness of Tolstoy's own vision of the world. Reality is more many-sided than Tolstoy is prepared to allow. Tolstoy is actually trying to colonize our minds as enjoyers of Shakespeare, if we are, by trying to make it impossible to watch Shakespeare anymore with enjoyment. And he just thinks this is daft, really. However, I mean, you see Orwell grappling with those kinds of thoughts in relation to Jonathan Swift. On the one side, he says, well, Swift's a great writer. This is in the Politics versus Literature essay, which I've written about. I'm not an Orwell expert. But I think that 1946 before 1984. Yeah. So there, he's grappling with the thought that, well, here's a man that he deeply admires as a writer, but actually is a high Tory, believer in God, at least ostensibly, and so forth, and somebody whose political views ought to be anathema to his. And you see him sort of wrestling with it, and in the end he says, well, yeah, I could see that Swift is pretty morbid, his obsession with the, the vileness of the human body, with excrement and so forth. I mean, it shows sort of more or less a pathological mind. But nevertheless, you have to recognise this is great literature. The literature lies somewhere beyond the range of values that any one person can coherently embrace. And I think the same applies, in a way, to thinking about torture. Not just how we view torture, but how we view our view about torture, if you like. And it's very easy to fall into what you might call single think about this. In other words, have an artificially monolithic and simplified view of torture as a phenomenon. There's one thing that's certain about torture, it's something that human beings could become quite expert at, and the capacity of torture is actually rather generously distributed across the population at large. So there's a question about how we understand that preparedness as a preparedness in ourselves. In a sense, it is of us that the tale is told, not just of some totalitarian figment or science fiction fantasy or something like that. It's about us. He called it a satire repeatedly, I think, in his correspondence, 1984. So obviously we do not live in the world of Airstrip 1 or Oceania, Eurasia and East Asia. However, I think there are certain aspects of the way in which the world is now run which should give us pause for thought. The interesting connection he makes, which came out again in the dramatisation, is between the preparedness to commit torture and the preparedness, almost the compulsion, to fabricate reality. Right, that's what O'Brien is doing, he says. We make history because we rewrite the records. And that's very clear with the description of the history of truth. Why do you do that? Because it's an expression of pure power. We torture because we can, we use power because the end of power is power, as O'Brien says to Winston during the interrogation scene. Now, how does that relate to nowadays? Well, I think in this way, we are obviously not living in a totalitarian state of the kind that Orwell imagined. We do, however, live in a society in which marketization, the market, an ethic of gratification and individual choice is all pervasive. And it seems to me there's more than a tenuous link, more than an artificial bond to be drawn between that and the preparedness to fabricate reality on the one side, and more specifically, the preparedness strategically to redefine a concept like torture for achieving local political objectives, such as removing people extrajudicially from one part of the world, engaging in basically practices like waterboarding, which at least are certainly on the borderline of torture and historically have been, as I think Claire's going to say, have been regarded as forms of torture. And as an ethic which says, well, we can define reality as we like, against what the neocons contemptuously call the reality-based community. In other words, people who think that reality is out there somewhere. I mean, you are there in the world of O'Brien, again, saying the world is such that we can use power in order to fabricate it to suit our purposes. It is the world as pure will. And so, I think in looking at the horrible scenes that have been enacted this afternoon, what we have to bear in mind is not thinking in terms of some sort of fantasy out there, it's seeing us in the torturer's chair, our preparedness to create political systems which are happy to fabricate reality on a whim, as it were, in the interests of pure power. And that gives us reason to think that we are actually stranger creatures than we may have suspected that we were, and to borrow a line from Philip Larkins, dulls to distance, all we are. Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much indeed.